Hey everybody, this is Perch, and this is somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for quite a long time, and he's got a new project. Howard Chaykin, how are you today?
I'm really just this side of fabulous because I always like to leave a little bit of wiggle room because you never know when things go right to hell.
Okay, that's good. That's good. It's good to keep your options open.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, especially in today's times. And nothing is going on in the world, so we got to be fine. You have a new book, so we want to talk to you about kind of your career. We've got a lot of different things to talk about. You are one of the creators that posts. If people haven't seen it, there's a Substack there where you put really pretty amazing thoughts, like very thoughtful thoughts. And it's one of my favorite Substacks that I go to. So I definitely lots to ask you about. But kind of out the gate, you have this is your first crowdfunding campaign you're doing with Zoop called Fargo. How is that going?
I'm really kind of excited, but I'm also always trepidatious because I'm an old kind of an old lady in a lot of ways. This is my first experience with this. I've resisted participation. I got sucked into this by the estimable Mike Stratford and the equally estimable Jordan Prosky at Zoop, and the material that we're basing this material on is stuff that went right under my radar when I was just the perfect audience for it. Late '60s, early '80s.
Yeah,
and when I got turned on to this stuff by Mike, it struck me immediately. The first piece of artwork I did with this was Mike has a long-standing tendency, which I applaud, of getting commissions of illustrations of characters he digs. The first one I did for Mike years ago was Jack Reacher.
Oh,
I've done Cranston, and before this project was even a German idea, I did a shot of Fargo, and the character is just ripe and rife with visual potential. There are 20 novels. From a historical perspective, there were 20 novels written mostly by a guy named the name of John Benteen, and Fargo himself is derived in a general sense from the character that Lee Marvin played in Richard Brooks's extraordinarily good movie, The Professionals.
Yeah.
What Benteen did was took the character, as played by Marvin, gave him a new name, gave him a backstory, and gave him a career and a justification for his behavior, which you couldn't do in a movie. In a movie, you're sketching this stuff in. Yeah. And the novels themselves, one of the reasons the novels are sort of lost to history is that they were published by second and third string paperback publishers. Had they been published by Signet or Bantam or Ballantine or Ace, they would have been much more present. One of the reasons why, for example, The Shadow didn't really come back to being was the Shadow novels were being published by one of those grade Z publishing houses back then as well. Mm-hmm. And the novels were promoted as Westerns. And that might have been one of the reasons why they were below my radar, because I wasn't a part of that audience. They're not Westerns in a very traditional sense. If we accept the fact, I told you I had oral earlier.
I love it.
If we accept the fact that the American Western, the traditional Western, comes to be around 1868 as the veterans of the Civil War are roaming and adventuring, and ends in the 1890s, this is not that book. These novels are about a guy who's a product of that world, who's a child of that world, an orphan, who was orphaned by a Comanche raid and raised by farmers who used him as labor. He ran away, became a circus roustabout, a boxer, a hired gun, a bouncer in a brothel, and finally found his calling serving in the Rough Riders under Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt is a linchpin of these novels because he and Roosevelt have a relationship, father-son, and the novels take place in sort of a fungible time around 1910, in that realm, like 1905 to 1915. And the Western part of it is that he's frequently on horseback. He's a cavalryman, but the novels take place in locales ranging from deep in the jungles of South America to the Yukon and Alaska. Hell on Wheels takes place in outside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Nice. And it's a pre-urban novel. One of the reasons we opted to take this novel, which is I think number 15 in the series, as I recall, is that it really does touch on all the keynotes of Fargo's relationship with the world. Fargo is a 19th century guy running roughshod over the early 20th century. And I'm one of those people who earnestly believes the modern world came to be in that era, that time between 1910 and the 1920.
Sure.
When all the money, all the fortunes that had been made by financing the victory of the Union and the Civil War, which then turned around and made the railroads, ultimately invented the 20th century. Airplanes, cars, radio. I mean, let's face it, 1912, you find David Sarnoff, who becomes the first major magnate of broadcasting, sitting on a roof, basically transcribing the telegraphy from the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah.
It's an amazing moment. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great part of the great era of history.
Oh, it's the best. I mean, you've still got that 19th century gas lamp, but you're looking at a 20th century engine.
Yeah.
And from an artist's perspective, I cannot tell you how rapturous it is to be able to use locomotives and train cars. They are graphic gifts.
You know, by the way, it's just funny you say that, because I've seen a number of other interviews when other people have talked about what is the hardest thing for people to draw, or what do the artists hate the most. Trains comes up constantly for artists, and I've never understood that.
They're idiots. They're obviously out of their fucking minds.
Clearly.
They're crazy.
Clearly.
I mean, weirdly, when I started this project, when we committed to this,
yeah,
I started looking at the way locomotives of that era were pictured. You know, the modern locomotive looks nothing like it used to. I mean, basically in the 1930s, when Raymond Loewy comes in and designs the first streamlined train, everything changes. But before that, they were, to a great extent, machines that looked like themselves, if that makes any sense. They were utterly unstripped. They were undesigned. They were contraption. There's an artist and photographer named Charles Sheeler, who was an abstractionist and a great photographer, who was obsessed with industrial America. And his paintings and his photographs of machinery, of locomotives, the way the wheels work, the way the pistons work, the way everything just fits together.
Yeah.
They're visionary, and they inform the way I think about this stuff. If you want to know what's really a bitch to draw, it's biplanes. Don't notice any of those guys about locomotives. Biplanes. I'm so grateful there were no biplanes in this job. But the locomotives, they lend themselves to such graphic ideas. They are, I work in a style that is based on building imagery around a money shot on a page by page basis.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing about locomotives is they're horizontal and they're three-quarter profile. You get so much action graphically out of the shapes. And again, we just went off on a tangent about why locomotives are fun.
Good one though.
But in its most reductive, Neil Fargo is what might have happened if Conan found himself riding with Pike Bishop and Dutch with the Wild Bunch up against Mapache.
I mean, the hook is great here. So not just the story, which I think is relatively, I'd say, untapped. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of material here, so a lot of stuff to mine. It's a fascinating time of history of everything happening, the action you can put together, and your style. And I think there's this line in the campaign. It says, his face was so battered, scarred, and weathered, and remarkably ugly that it was almost handsome. It's right. There's a huge amount of appeal to how this is pitched. So you've been having a hell of a good time doing this, it sounds like.
Oh, the script is written. Yeah. I approach every job as if it's going to go fruition. That's just the way I function. Mm-hmm. So right now, the 186-page novel has been translated into a 96-page script. It's written. It's in my editor's hands right now. Yeah. And I'm waiting for him to come back and start hitting me over the head with it. As I do. And the first 5 pages are drawn, and I'm waiting for further colors on those pages from my colorist. So I'm pushing forward. One of the things I've heard about crowdfunders is that frequently people promise and don't deliver. Mm-hmm. And as I said before we went on the air, I'm a guy who is afraid to be identified as an imposter. So if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Yeah. One of the reasons why I haven't delivered pencil on any job I've done since the 80s is that I'm a brand in that sense, and that I'm good for my word. I mean, the comic relationship I have fandom as opposed to my relationship among clients is really a gap. Because I can be obstreperous, I can be detached and distancing, but as a working professional, I am profoundly dependable. I just booked two jobs, two varying covers, and what my work this week is going to be to get comps on those so I can get them approved, so I can do finishes when I get back from Europe on the 11th of November. Mm-hmm. And one of them pays extremely well, and one of them pays enough for me to pay my colorist and my production guy. I mean, but they're going to get exactly the same level of effort.
Yeah.
Because that is what a professional does.
Okay.
And that, so basically I'm operating on the assumption that Fargo is a go. And I'm just moving forward on it. That's
I mean, I think it's clearly going to hit target. I think it's got a couple.
That's all I care about. You know?
Yeah, it's going to go, and I think the more word gets out here, it's good. Anyway, it looks 96 pages. First of all, I mean, in terms of a product, the pricing here is pretty amazing. Considering I see similar prices for something with a tenth the amount of pages, and certainly nobody with your caliber. But anyway, it looks great. The pitch itself, though, is the big piece, and the concept looks absolutely amazing. So hoping that gets forward. But to touch on something you just said, actually, about being a professional, some of what we want to get into and kind of your time in comics. One of the things I do, I listen to a bunch of other interviews. I always hate it when people ask the same question over and over and over. Like, tell me what it was like working at Marvel. You've been asked things 100 times. I wanted to pick one of your quotes that I saw from your Substack around work and kind of the determination to be in comics. And you've talked a lot about it, but it says, me, I deluded myself to believe that somehow, some way, I could find work in the comic book field and maintain this foolishness until my delusion somehow came true through a delightful and spirited melange of hunger and rage. Basically, really, that's what it took. And people have kind of interpreted that as if you just work hard, then you'll be a success. But that's not really what you're saying. You're talking about a determination to get somewhere more than just hard work by itself. Is that? Do I have it right, or how would you?
To a profound extent, yes. I mean, there's no osmosis available. I used to know a guy who had one of the most extravagantly beautiful library of books on what we do, and not a spine was cracked. And I was so completely driven by love for this work that I cannot. There was never a sense of entitlement in my entire experience, and that lack of entitlement ensues to this day.
Yeah.
I take myself seriously. I take the work seriously, and I've said more than once that comics is a pointless and ultimately frivolous medium, which is difficult to do well. Yeah. And well, of course, it's a subjective idea, because my definition of excellence and the definition of excellence that comes from fandom is often, a chasm that can be unbreached, that cannot be breached. And in my case, I was a grind in every way, shape, and form. Someone posted a page from an interview I did with Marilyn Bethke when I was 28.
Wow.
I look like one of the usual suspects left out of the musical. And I, what I'm talking about there is this need. When I was a kid, I met Gil Kane when I was 13 years old. Mm-hmm. At a bookstore, at a used bookstore, where I was selling comics that I stolen from a friend of mine, and he was looking for Will James books. Well, Gil was notorious for always looking for ways to improve the way he do horses. His horses were excellent and elegant. I went to work for him when I was 18, and he dismissed my work as utterly worthless. And he was right. But what I didn't understand, and of course I didn't understand until much later, that the arc of my career and his arc were very similar. The difference being, of course, he was nowhere nearly as dreadful as I was, but he was pretty damn dreadful when he was started. And he was like me, motivated by a desperate need for attention and meaning as applies through the obsession. And I think his fatal flaw was that he lost touch with the underpinning, the making of the material. And I never have. Yeah. I've said this more than once. I owe my career to 5 men on whose shoulders I stand. And among other things, the connecting tissue among those men is none of them could write worth a shit. And writing worth a shit is, for me, where I saved my own life.
Gotcha.
That because I came to understand early on that the generation of writers who were of my contemporaries were, for the most part, failed artists.
Yeah.
Who took writing as a second position. But there were exceptions, and of course now that's not the case as much as it was back then, because now the writer is the alpha. The writer dictates the form.
Yeah, sometimes unfortunately, yes, but yeah.
I mean, it's but there are specific reasons for this that I believe, sure. and because I came to understand, I'm reading Michael Hill's book about Jack Kirby right now, and the theme that continues to run through it is the evolution of the definition of writing in comics. One of the reasons why, despite the fact that my work wasn't very good, that I continued to get work in the 70s until I ended up getting good, was that I was a good story man. And I understood first instinctually, then innately, and then intellectually how to use a page to convey a narrative idea. Right. And I guess I'm getting into this kind of the somewhat esoteric weeds here, but you started this. So
it's good.
This is, I mean, for example, the Star Wars material. I mean, Roy had no idea what those pages were going to look like until he got them from me, because I broke the script down. I'm like a shit. I didn't expect to be paid extra for this. because it never occurred to me that I was entitled.
Yeah.
And when I became a writer, well, I mean, for example, when I came over to Marvel from Atlas, it never occurred to me to convince them to let me write the Dominic Fortune stuff, even though I've been writing the Scorpion.
Right.
There was so proscribed a series of almost kabuki-like functions built into the work.
Yeah, there's a mechanism there that was, for them, it were tracks that were incredibly hard to stray out from. And do you think, by the way, just to aside, was that because it was a corporation and they were trying to behave that way, even though they were not quite there, or was it just habit? Or
not at all. I think it was just there were just certain patterns and regulations that seem to exist contextually.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is how it is done. This is how we do it here. And it wasn't until I broke out and did Flag that I began to understand that I was a better writer than most of the people writing comic books at the time, that I had a point of view, that I was able to articulate that point of view both textually and visually. That's the key.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing an all-day lecture at the Ackerman Hall at UCLA on the 18th of November with Mark Wade. And what I talk about there is the relationship between text and visual, that your job as a comic book artist is not to be an illustrator, but rather a graphic designer in the service of narrative.
Yep.
To create pages that are endowed with narrative value and create images and panels on those pages that are equally endowed with narrative value, that those panels themselves are microcosms of the page itself. And again, esoterica, but real. There is a language there. You started this by asking whether that it was a matter of gumption and determination, and to a certain extent, what I'm coming up against now. I did the Substack piece I did about comics broke me.
Yep, the comics broke me.
Was about this assumption that seems to be rampant, that's been evolving culturally for the past decade or so.
Yeah, beyond comics for sure.
Pardon me?
Beyond comics for sure. I mean, it's a much bigger problem.
That everything is seen through the scrim of entertainment.
Right.
That you have students giving review of their instructors, and the word enjoy pops up as if enjoyment and entertaining pleasure is the primary reason for your presence in the room. And they call it work for a reason. Yeah. And there's this sensibility that has seemed to evolve that you are owed a living by this, that there is not much of a gap between reading comics and making them, that Robert Crumb's, offbeat crack, it's just lines on paper, kids, is a truth as opposed to a sarcastic dismissal.
Right.
And that there is a language, that it requires effort, that it requires work, that it is, remains, mainstream comics are utterly pointless. They exist almost exclusively as intellectual property and for ancillary functions, because our actual audience for reading mainstream comics is shrinking daily, because there's no new people coming in. The new people coming in are reading manga for a couple of years or anime and then they move on to like real life. And what's left are people like you and me, 60, 70, 80-year-old men, arguing over Batman's dick.
Yeah. Always fun to argue over that. Doesn't have a belt, for example.
Constantly comes up in conversation.
Yeah. I think, you're reminding me of something that Steve Jobs used to say a lot around tech. And it was one of the things that his contemporaries, people around him, always argued with. And he tried to land the point, always landed well with me, but I don't think it landed with his peers. And it was basically that, hard work is critical and passion is key, because if you were rational, you would not keep doing it. That if you're going to truly invent something or break something or innovate on something, if you're going to be doing this, it's going to suck and it's going to take a lot of work at various times. And if you're a sane person, you'd give up. But the passion keeps you pushing, keeps you in that hard work. And sometimes that pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But the people who are truly passionate about it do it anyway, because it's what they just have to do. It's what they're committed to. And the second you start to open up the door to, well, it's about entertaining yourself, like you said, or it should be fun at some point. The hard work ends and then it crests and you just ride and coast downhill. That's not anything to ever be. And to him, that was death.
I pray for that, because all I really want is comfort and privacy. Nobody's granting me that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't read comics, with very few exceptions. There are a couple of books I've read over the past couple of years that I really dig. But the charge and pleasure that I once received from reading comic books, I now receive from making them. Yeah. I get up every morning. I do a series of meditative gestures. I have coffee with colleagues that remind me of my own insignificance. And I sit down at my desk around 9 o'clock in the morning and I look at my mission. I don't work on time anymore. I work on mission. This must be done today.
Yeah.
And I, for example, my mission today is clear. Once you and I have completed this conversation, I've got two sets of rough comps to prepare. Mm-hmm. And once those are done, I will decide whether I'm going to add any more to my workflow, because I'm in kind of in a stasis place right now, or I will yell at my colorist or yell at my assistant, things like that, just to get things moving.
It's good to have options.
Yeah, I do. But at no point, I mean, it certainly has become easier because, Christ's sake, I have a skill set that's evolved.
Sure.
But, there's that gap that exists between talent and skill sets. There are people who are far more talented than I who die in poverty in the poorhouse because they don't understand that talent is in and of itself a wasting idea. It begins to diminish at a certain point. You crest and curve and die. Whereas a skill set, assuming your hands are still manipulable, is something that continue to evolve.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the fact that at my late age, I'm 73 years old now. I was 72 and a half until the day before, but my skill set remains intact. And my critical thinking in regard to that skill set remains intact, because frequently you begin to go easier on yourself with the visualization of the idea that your skill set creates. I mean, I'm doing a wraparound cover for someone, and that's a new challenge, because composing horizontally, no matter whether they dismiss the back cover at all, is an entirely different series of problems. And I'm looking forward to the challenge, turning it on its side. And one of the things I talk about in the paradigm lecture is the difficulty of composing for a horizontal image. I'm old enough to remember when the aspect ratio of a screen was 3 wide, 2 high.
Yeah.
And now, the aspect ratio is look we're looking at right now, our aspect ratio. And composing for that horizontal space is really difficult because it's by nature dull. It's a landscape. So the diagonals are where you find your love. So these are just things that are both instinctual and intellectual.
Yeah.
But Hunger and Blind Rage sustained me. But it also made me buckle down and realize that I had to learn craft.
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, I still have no idea what First Comics was thinking when they offered me the opportunity to do American Flag.
That's how a lot of, that's I think the people who have that passion, they often have these questions. It's not unusual. How did we start? But speaking of starting, actually, not to hop with something else, but you mentioned something else in one of your Substacks, which again is fascinating. People should check it out, read it, and it parallels me. And I'm just, this may or may not be a very interesting topic for you, but you said as a child you learned to read through comics, and that people failed to recognize that connection. And it was I don't know, you expressed a little bit of, I don't know if frustration is the right word, but just kind of bafflement of like, why it seems like an easy connection, but people didn't realize it. And that was certainly my experience as well. I learned to read through comics. I had the same, people couldn't understand why I could read.
A genetic anomaly.
Yeah, exactly. This kid's just, and eventually my father was a principal at the time. I remember there was a light bulb that went off on his head going, holy shit, this is how you get kids to read. And then he pushed it all in, but then went through, of course, this is 70s, 80s, or 70s more. He gets then the parents out there like, hey, these are terrible things and they're going to rot the brain and that whole fight. But why do you think it's so hard for people to get that connection? Because as comics is struggling to get that new audience, as you mentioned, it feels pretty apparent that there are some easy avenues that both the industry and life seems to ignore.
The Comics Code Authority, to my belief, infantilized the product and also infantilized the audience.
Yeah,
and it reduced comics to necessarily a children's medium, and it drove away anyone with anything more ambitious than what was left. And that ambition ultimately was satisfied, like say 7 or 8 years later, with the advent of the underground. And those guys were old enough to have experienced the beginnings of the Comics Code, young enough to be resentful of that experience, and to produce work that was profoundly transgressive. The instinct to blame comics for social ills is so risible a trope that it's ridiculous. If it's not video games, it's comics. If it's not video games and comics, it's horror movies. I
think we're both old enough that we've seen it come around several times, and it's always fascinating that it's like, oh, we're doing this again, I guess.
I mentioned earlier I have breakfast and have coffee every morning with colleagues. I live in a small town in Southern California, about an hour and a half north of Los Angeles. No one has any idea what I do for a living. And it's really good. And my colleagues remain nonplussed at the fact that I make a living doing this. It's just like, what? They pay you for this? Because those parents who are calling it junk and mind rotting have the same sort of reaction to this material. It's based on contempt prior to investigation.
Right.
And it's not helped along by a lot of the talent who's self-justifying, self-mythologizing, creates this idea that it's the new mythology. It's just disposable junk that is entertaining.
Yeah.
And the alternative comics I'm in that weird place where I'm too weird for the mainstream and too mainstream for the weird. I'm in a slide of contempt from both sides.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah, by the way, I wouldn't know at all what that's like being attacked by both sides. That's
on the same day, I've been called a demon in a human skin suit by a trans artist, a trans woman artist who clearly hasn't been able to find traction because comics broke her too.
Mm.
And a neutered butler of the social justice warriors by some right-wing twat.
Yeah.
So, I'm roundly despised from both sides, and I'm comfortable with that.
I was going to ask you about divided states of hysteria. How you were surprised by that reaction, right?
I was because I was more generous to the criticism.
You were.
Than in retrospect I should have been.
Yeah.
Reading this piece I mentioned to you earlier by Justin E.H. Smith
gave
me removed the encoding to much of that criticism and pointed me in a direction that's clarified where that criticism came from to a profound extent. And I work in a business in which, in comic books, mainstream comic books, the armature of mainstream comic book narrative, taking if you look at the McKee course of film screenwriting, the 3-act structure, the structure of comic books is almost identical to Chuck Jones's Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. It's a Mobius strip with perpetual pursuit, never closure, an implied closure, with a series of rules which are resistant to narrative rules. And in the context of that narrative structure, characterization, character development is more often than not barely more than one note. That it's Spider-Man gets a black outfit. That's character development. Batman loses and gains his little white yellow circle around his outfit. Superman loses his trunks. And because basically you're dealing with characters that are owned corporately.
Right.
They cannot really have closure. They cannot actually have change in their lives. And when I got piled on by this crowd of witch burners, I granted them the potential that, because of course they didn't read the whole book, they responded to the first thing and assumed, like all mainstream comics, that I would end up exactly where I was.
Right.
And I don't do that. It's just not who I am. Reuben Flagg begins the first issue of the first 3 issues as a dupe and a rube. And by the end of that first 3 issues, he is transformed. He's gone from being an honest victim to an earnest Ganef. He's not quite a criminal, but he's working the system. Okay. And the same thing is true in the divided states of hysteria. Yeah. These characters change. One of the reasons I'm struggling with the sequel, and I've written, the sequel exists, it's a script.
Yeah.
My Italian publisher is really pissed it's not finished because he really wants to promote it. Is that reality keeps interfering with the material itself. We're only audible, honey, so don't worry about it. You can do whatever you like. That's my beautiful wife. Yeah. And it's true of Marked Man. It's true of Midnight of the Soul. These projects that I've done that have beginning, middles, and ends, because I'm not serving the need for that Mobius strip of Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. And I love Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. I do. I'm crazy about it.
There's a place for all of these things, but that's not what everything has to be.
I was a Super Dragon Monster Space Mutant guy from Word 1. I mean, that's what I was. That's all I loved. But when I became a working professional, going back to my lack of talent and lack of skill, I was not skilled enough to do acceptable commercial superbooks. I didn't have the skill set. And most of my generation, with a couple of very specific exceptions, earnestly believed that we would outlive superhero comic books. The superhero comic books were being drawn by men our parents' age for children half our age. And they would go away. Yeah. Because there was no one in my generation, with the exception of guys like Rich Buckler or Jim Starlin, who could do variations on a theme of what Stan intuited Jack was doing. Right. And what we didn't know was that sooner rather than later, the reins would be removed from from the trope that the quotation marks that wrapped around the word superhero comic books, and make it possible for people who are autre talent like Frank Miller, like Bill Sienkiewicz, like Dennis Cowan, to come in to draw superhero comics and look nothing like Jack's work. That
Right.
no way echoed that work. And we were flummoxed, gobsmacked, and never recovered, really.
Yeah.
We always believed that we would be the second coming of EC, and the rest of our careers have been scrambles.
It was strange to see that moment play out for that Image book, because, as you say, I think if people would have just, first of all, read it, I think that would have eliminated about 90% of it, all the fuss. And then you responded to it. As you made the mention, you probably were a little too nice when you first came in. I mean, you responded to it, I think, earnestly. Like, I really don't understand why everybody is acting like a crazy asshole here. I'm paraphrasing, but but I think the points you were making were not exactly the hardest to figure out, but it felt like there was a kind of a manic glee that was going on.
Oh, absolutely.
It had nothing to do with your book at some point.
Well, no, I mean, right now, we are living in an era of the weaponizing of fragility.
Yeah.
And there's a race to the bottom as to who can be more easily hurt by things, by microaggressions, by hurt feelings. And very little offends me, but I'm easily insulted, and I hold grudges. And and I've come to understand that, when one of those, I mean, it was bad enough taking it from fandom, because they're operating from the contemporary investigation mode. But when colleagues took it upon them, I mean, one guy in particular, I mean, which was hysterically funny, when he said, "I'm all for artistic freedom, but," without any real understanding of the fact that but obviates everything he said before. You cannot be in that but. You cannot but.
Yes.
And I've come to understand that it reflected an aspect of culture that continues to evolve. That, I mean, I come from a very, very, I've come from a family of I'm a red diaper baby. I come from a very, very left-wing family. Mm-hmm. But what that means and meant then has no context.
Oh, for sure.
With modern progressive culture. And the idea that students have had academics fired for microaggressions, and yet those same people whose feelings are hurt are silent in the face of murder, unfortunately, of people that are not on the victim culture list, underpins the hypocrisy of contemporary culture. And furthermore, the mistaking of chastity for moral acuity, mistaking a prudishness for virtue, is ridiculous. It's just absurd. We are living in a culture in which, as genuine religion is slowly being eroded, despite the fact that these evangelical lunatics, the tools and skill sets of evangelism are being adopted by a power-hungry wing of progressive culture. Yeah. When I hear the word problematic used, I know what's really being said is blasphemous. It's blasphemy.
Yep.
And controversial means profane, as if these two phrases are inviolable absolutes, as opposed to utterly plastic and situational.
That's what I said.
But I mean, I sleep well.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Well, what's funny is as we see how it play out in years later, and where I kind of wrap my head around, which is why I'm glad you're doing this crowdfunded book, which is, as you continue to do other things, and wanted to ask you about Hey Kids Comics, which, sprung out as an absolutely amazing book if people aren't picking that up. But
nobody's picking it up. Trust me on this. If they were, the shit would be kicked out of me on a more regular basis. Nobody's reading.
Yeah. Well, okay, fair enough. But it felt like what happened with with the blowback on Divided States of Hysteria, it felt like that became ground zero for a lot of repeated plays, because that same play got repeated over and over, while simultaneously, as you mentioned earlier, new customers aren't coming in. There aren't, the market itself is not growing. And so it has this feeling like the house is shrinking and the people inside the house are happily pouring gasoline all over the floor and lighting it on fire. And you're just wondering, how in the hell did we get here?
Well, I grew up in fandom, but I never went to a convention until I was a working professional, because what I saw of it on television was kind of scary to me. But I was a golden age collector when I was 12 and 13, when I could actually afford to be. And I recognized the fact, the dichotomy, the conundrum of the secret knowledge I had of this world, the love that I had for comics, the desperate need for that love to be acknowledged and admired, and ultimately the terror of having it co-opted at the same time.
Yeah.
And we live in a culture right now in which the guys who used to beat us up for reading comics in school are now making bank off the work we loved.
Yep.
When I was working in television and I was between jobs or in the process of pitching other things, inevitably I would be forcing on a guy who was working in development, a guy or a woman, at a development and a production unit, who was my biggest fan. And they'd been designated as their comic book go point person by their boss, and they'd spend 2 months reading up on comics.
Oh,
one of the funniest experiences working in comics is going to the San Diego Comic Book Convention and getting out of there on Saturday, getting the train on Saturday. Because the train home from San Diego during the convention on Saturday is packed with development people pissed off that they had to go to this fucking thing and trying to salvage some of their weekend, which was, they were just the grimness of those cars was fantastic. I was getting out because I'd come down on Friday, had dinner with colleagues, and was ready to get home. But yeah, it's so that we are members of a secret club. Yeah. And the club is no longer a secret. And I've said it more than once. The only genius working in comics today is Kevin Feige.
Yeah,
who managed to monetize to the tune of billions material based on original source material that 99.99% of the people spending those billions have no idea exists. And that micro percentage of those who do don't give a shit. They don't care. None of that trickles down. I live in a small town, as I've said. And back in 2008, when the Iron Man movie trailer was coming around, our neighbors, everybody was going batshit. They thought it was just the coolest. They had no idea it was a comic book. Had they known, they would have asked me, and I wouldn't have. I said, I don't know. And when they find out what I do for a living, they assume that there's money flowing in my direction from sales. No, it's not. That doesn't. Yeah,
those big royalty Marvel checks. Yeah.
Right. I love the fact. Look, I've been making my living in comics for over half a century, but I also, as I said earlier, left comics for 15 years to work in television because I never had that commercial footprint that would have made it possible for me to get this old with nothing but comics.
Yeah,
I moved to California simply because I recognized in an 8-month-long epiphany that despite the critical acclaim that I was receiving for American Flag and then Times Square, I had no footprint, and that I was not going to be able to make a living, and that I was going to need health coverage at one point or another. And I made an active decision to get the hell out of New York, regretfully, because I'd like to have been able to afford to hold on to my place, but those days are gone. And moved to California to get into the movie business and stumbled into television, for which I remain forever grateful. Never worked on a show I'd watch, but gave it all, as I used to say on what's his name, Jack Armstrong, All American Boy. I gave it all for Hudson High, and worked my ass off, and did the best I could with the shit that I was given. It's different now. The difference is that I was making a lot more money working on shit. These guys today are making a lot less money working on much better product.
Yeah,
but I'm very grateful for the year I've had. For the life I've had. In the 1970s when comics paid shit, I was grateful enough to have developed a skill set to do advertising artwork. So I was doing mini frames and comps for storyboards and magazine ads because comics paid nothing. I I was making $23 a page for pencils on Fat Freddy the Grey Mouser and Iron Wolf. $23 a page. Wow. $45 for ink pages. So, and even then, that wasn't a lot of money.
No.
I would make $150 a day, $150 a day, sitting in a cubicle for 7 hours drawing mini frames for J. Walter Thompson.
Yeah,
and that was some good money, you know. And I know comic book fans don't like hearing this because they like to think of us as doing work out of the love. And you know, I love the work, but it's still my job. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's bullshit. It's still fucking work.
Yeah, that's very romanticized. That's not how. Well, that goes back to that passion thing. You're not going to have that scenario as much as what do you want. But I, at least I would hope, or for me at least, listening to you talk and kind of tell your story of where you've been. There's still, you know, you're still working, but you don't seem bitter. You don't seem pissed. You're not. You know, you listen to some of these other interviews and hear some of these stories of people who, you know, and like the comics broke me thing. There's a lot of, you know, the only difference there is you got people in their 20s saying comics broke them, which is kind of wild to think about. But
you know, it's like Super Chicken said to Fred, you knew the job was dangerous when you took it. You know, when I hear that, you know, comics will break your heart, kid, blah blah blah. It's the subtext of that is one of narcissism. Yeah. Is the implicit assumption that it fucked everybody else, but I'm special enough not to be fucked.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I have no bitterness is I knew what I was getting into when I got into it. I take reality at its own terms, and I have no assumptions or entitlement about any expectations. I completely abjure the idea of self-mythologizing. I'm surrounded. There are all too many guys in comics who behave as if it's the labors of Hercules. It's a Sisyphean shoving a rock up a hill. Bullshit. You're making a living from your fucking hobby. And, you know, and just, you know, calm down, relax yourself a little bit. My dog is on camera. That was really good. He's a big dog.
I'm always amazed by the way you go to a con and you're in the bar after the con and people are kind of reminiscing about the day. And there's kind of people don't fit into just two categories, but kind of two big groups. There's people who are like, I had a good time, met some people, having a drink, just relaxing and kind of unwinding. And the other group is like, shit, I got to get geared up for tomorrow. This was the most grueling torture sitting at that table and signing. And God damn it, I hate it. And I'm always fascinated that second group, like at some point, go work for Arby's. Why are you doing this? I stopped drinking many years ago, so I tend to stay away from the saloons anyway. Not out of any. I'm a buzzkill, you know, because I just, you know, I don't really give a shit. But I will say that I do a lot of conventions. You know, I like engagement. I like visiting. I like travel. I travel well, and when I sit down at my table and I'm there for the day, and I've said this is a mantra that I lay out when I'm at a show, which is to say that the convention is my client and you, the conventioneers, are my client's customers. I am here to be of service to you within the context of good behavior and good performance. But when that bell rings to end the day, history. I'm gone. Yeah. You know, I'm dinner with colleagues. Dinner with colleagues, talking shit and talking shop. And that's really what it's about. I mean, the last major show I did was in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And Baltimore has taken a bad hit from lockdown. Yeah. And so we ended up having dinner at the same restaurant a number of nights in a row, just because it's a great joint. We know the people and everything else. And they were the perfect ending to every day because you caught up. You know, I'm not one of those guys who girds up to spend the night while I'm back in my hotel room doing commissions. Nonsense. You know, I'll take commissions for off-site stuff. But once the bell is rung, the night is my own. And I'm not a party guy. I mean, I don't care about people that much. I'm not that interested in socializing. I'm very socialized, as you can see. But you know, I don't have the social lubricant available to me, so I get very bored really quickly. And my standards are, you know, I'm not that good. Hey, quick question. So a couple of things that I was looking through. And I wanted to ask about what seems like a completely bonkers story, but the other one is I saw in an interview referenced a book you were doing for Marvel several years ago called Female Problems. What was that book? What was that book? What in the world was that book?
Basically, they wanted to do Sex in the City with Marvel. And I'd forgotten completely about that till you mentioned it. I mean, it just, boy, am I glad I didn't do that. Oh, fuck. But talk about dodging a fucking bullet. Let me tell you.
Well, I'm imagining the response that would have got. I mean, like Twitter would have loved that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I am on Twitter. I'm somewhere between Satan's nephew. Or Hitler's undiscovered child, you know. I mean, I'm the only social media network that I deal with is Facebook because it's made for old people.
I'm sure they want that.
I'm there all the time. Right now I'm in the process of unfriending a lot of people. It's really good. I love it.
That is a good feeling. Yeah,
it's a joy and a pleasure. But man, I'd forgotten completely about that. Holy shit!
Marvel's.
I think I did a page and a half synopsis and a couple of rough ideas, and there was no way that was going to happen. It was just
Marvel's women superheroes, Sex in the City. That was the pitch, basically. Mm-hmm. Oh man, yeah, that would have been amazing.
The problem is I'm not gay enough.
There you go. Oh yeah,
that's cool. You know, I mean. You know, one of the things that always struck me about Sex and the City is that Sex and the City always struck me as a show in which actresses were playing avatars of gay men, in you know, acting out in New York City because, you know,
if at the time,
it's, you know, it works for me. You know?
Yeah. How about as a weirder story? And I promise I'll dodge away from other.
Yeah, you really got you dug deep.
That was good. I know. I mean, I was playing in my head what that book could have possibly been. So I'm just, and did it come out but under a different name? Like, but okay.
I think it died thankfully of boring.
I'm trying to. Was this the genesis behind A-Force? Was that? But anyway, you talk about a comic convention you were in Barcelona.
Yes.
And you may know where I'm going with this. So
I do.
You're talking about Will Eisner kind of coming up and chatting with you, and this is the word that gets me, casually. In what you said, so casually called you a fascist,
right?
And then as kind of time went on, you know, you're talking through your thought process at the time. It seemed to spring from basically a small handful of covers that you did was where he came.
Yes.
How in the I can't even mentally wrap my head around that of
how he could draw this conclusion, or how I could you know.
Well, I mean, I guess all of it. I mean, drawing the conclusion off a couple covers just seems stupid. But
let me explain something to you very simply.
Please.
Will Eisner, as revered as he is by the audience, does not have an extraordinary love from the talent pool.
Yeah, that's somewhat people. I think hopefully that's more well known, but I think that's out there.
I mean, he was one of the most condescending, disdainful shit stains I've ever known in my life. Yeah. He was a guy who, and the reason for that fascism remark was that whereas he had done precisely what I had done in the case of Black Hawk, where he had basically incorporated SS uniforms for an allied air force, he was incapable of identifying anyone else having the smarts to be that satirically clever.
It reminds me of some blowback that the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark got about 8 years ago when somebody saw it for the first time or whatever. And
I've only seen the movie once in its first release, so I've never seen an Indiana Jones movie since.
Well, okay, what was? I didn't miss much, but I mean, in it, at one point, Harrison Ford disguises himself as a Nazi soldier because he's literally trying to infiltrate the Nazi camp. That is what the mission is, and people were kind of going off on, was this a pro-Hitler movie because it showed Nazi imagery? And I remember at the time wondering how would you do a World War II set film fighting the Nazis without using Nazi? I mean, but that level of thought. That's the stuff that just haunts me at this point in this industry.
It's a schmuck world.
Yeah, that's what the title of this video. Yeah,
wide world of schmuckery. You know, yeah. I mean,
amazing.
It astonishes.
It's crazy.
I mean, I'll close the Eisner thing with an anecdote, which I just heard recently that I deeply regret that, and I've heard it from two sources, so I take it for real. I deeply regret it. I didn't include it in the Hey Kids back matter. Apparently, Eisner, when Stan was having some success at Marvel, put together a dinner with a bunch of talent, some from Stan's bullpen, some others, and brought them all to the Palm to bring the idea of creating a comic book line to compete with Stan. And he met with indifference to resistance. He excused himself and went to the toilet and fled, leaving them with the tab. That is a perfect illustration of this. So,
that's
I'm kicking I'm pissing on the grave of the dead. Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, it's been done, but yeah. Tell me real quickly, one last thing, and then want to just ask one more question about the new book. And again, the link's in the description. Please go check this out. It looks, the whole premise just looks amazing. And I don't fawn over stuff. So, it's genuine. Hey Kids Comics. I'm loving this book. You kind of jokingly, as I put it out there earlier, it's not selling 100,000 copies. No. But it is a pretty incredible book.
I have more Facebook friends than I'm selling monthly issues.
Okay, which is a shame because this is there's a lot of density it means a negative thing, and I don't mean it that way here. But there's just a lot of depth to comics, and when I see a lot of people wanting to kind of have this peel back part of the industry, it's a lot of it's in this book.
But they don't want to really peel back. They want their suspicions confirmed.
Okay.
They want to believe that Stan Lee really likes them, and that comics won't break them, and that we're all just a bunch of comic book loving guys, and that just isn't the case.
Yeah,
it's work.
Is it a tough book to do?
Actually, no, not really. I mean,
cathartic,
my level of restraint is where the effort comes in. I mean, I'm dreading the upcoming convention season because I'm assuming that people will finally have seen the book, and there are people who will never speak to me again, I suspect. And I'm okay. I'm old, so I have less time to worry about that.
More time for yourself. It works.
Exactly.
I mean, that's how I look at it. But in this, I've heard many times. I mean, in threads where I've been in this, one of the fascinating parts for people reading the book is they're trying to figure out, okay, who's he talking about here, basically. Who are these characters? And part of the appeal for me, at least, is that the book does not spoon feed you, with a couple exceptions, who the people are supposed to be. I mean, there's some obvious ones, but
right. But I mean, a lot of the avatars are conflations. I mean, I've taken backstories and front stories of other people to combine characters and to basically, be as objective as I possibly can in a subjective product, because the book is subjective, obviously.
Yeah.
The essay that I've written for the third and final volume talks about the fact that people presumed out front that it was going to be a settling of scores, and that's not the case at all. When I asked for input, when I first was doing that first volume, every single note I got was like, "Hey, fuck that guy," It was, and I just didn't want to do that. I mean, obviously there are people there's a character in there who's obviously an avatar of me. Come on. It's me.
Yeah.
And I'm just as scabrous with that character as I am with others. And there are people who I've haven't come. I wish had been dead when I did the material, so I could have gone directly for their throats. Right?
I love it.
What can I tell you?
It's a great book. I mean,
yeah. Thanks.
I think people got to read that, and it does. But it doesn't feel like. With a lot of titles that kind of get in this area, it feels like it's either a Hollywood glamorized version or an unnecessary deconstructed Watchmen version of it. And this one, it just feels like an authentic version of it, if that makes any sense.
I spent as I said, Gil introduced me to all the old guys.
Yeah.
And I listened to these guys' stories, and I was there in the beginning of my generation. And, there was always a series of, I think my generation gobsmacked the previous one. The next generation gobsmacked us.
Yeah.
And the guys who came in the 90s were just, we couldn't figure out what the hell they were doing. It just seemed, there was this almost this kabuki-esque quality to the work that just seemed alienating.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, fortunately, everything's worked out now, and everybody's on the right track.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
It's like they say in the Lego movie. Everything is awesome.
Yeah, everything. It couldn't be better.
I only use the word awesome in relationship to my disbelief in God. So there you go.
It works.
I misbelieve.
Well, listen, I think as kind of first of all, you've given me an hour of your time, which I really appreciate.
I've had more fun than I'm entitled to, so just watch yourself.
Oh, I'd keep going. But people should check out this campaign. It's got the video will probably go up in a day or two. I'll try and get out very quickly. But you got about 2 weeks, a little bit less than that, to get in here, fund this thing. A lot of good tiers. I mean, to give a sense of it, we're talking 96 pages, full color, hardcover for $40, which
is really ridiculously cheap, considering
ridiculously.
And again, it is bereft of people with lasers coming out of their eyes, so that's your standard. Go elsewhere. But it is a high adventure book, PG-13, considering where it's coming from. Yeah. No dirty stuff. And I'm having the time of my life doing it. So, if my pleasure and joy can translate to your pleasure and joy, what more can anyone ask of life?
Good adventure, great hook, trains. Got some pretty amazing stuff in there.
Trains, horses, mules, cars. It's all sorts of cool stuff.
All the things people say they hate drawing, and you're doing it. So
they're crazy. They don't know what they're talking about.
I love it. Listen, Howard, I thank you so much for the time. Please go check out the campaign. Get this thing funded. Can I follow back up with you in a month or two and see how you're doing?
I'd be delighted. As I said, this is more fun than I'm entitled to.
I love it.
For a guy who has hair as good as you're not annoying me, which is really it's pretty good hair. It's good hair.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Hair is always a measure for me. So there you go. Hey, thanks again.
Thank you. We'll talk again real soon.
Without fail, I'm looking forward to it.